Friday night. I'm late again, but it's really late for you.
Yeah, I'm in St. George for the weekend. Just 2 weeks till Ironman, and I figured I needed a little change of venue for the last push before the taper starts on Monday. So yeah, we're a little late here, but that's completely fine because I woke up on Las Vegas time, so I'm
Yeah,
okay.
there you go. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
And is it raining up there now, or is it?
It was raining. Actually, it never rained on us on the ride up, but the drive up, but it was wet roads most of the
Oh
way.
yeah, yeah.
And you could see in front of us that it was raining, but it's supposed to be an awesome weekend here. No wind and in the 70s every day
Okay,
for highs. That's going to be nice for my long run tomorrow. Just
nice.
yeah, I can't even remember the last time I had a nice long run at 70 degrees. That wasn't at 4:35 in the morning, right?
No, that's right. That's right. I love this time of year. But yeah, I have, for whatever reason, my weather app, I still have hurricanes set in it in St. George. So I get the weather alert from up there. It's like, oh, it's going to rain in 15 minutes. Oh, lightning strike in St. George. So it's helpful, but it's a little ways away from me right now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
But
Yeah, so it should be a good weekend of training. You got a big weekend on tap. I mean, you're 8
uh,
weeks out from
no,
your race, right?
yeah, the next race, if I'm going to do it, will be Pumpkin Man. But then Indian Wells is the one that Indian Wells half is the next big race that I'd be shooting for, which is December.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm still in a bit of recovery mode from St. George and then doing the Las Vegas Tri uh, last weekend. So
Yeah, and congratulations on another overall podium at the race last weekend. That's awesome to see.
well, when the big dogs don't show up, I have a chance to sneak on the overall. So
Hey, you only race who shows up, right?
that's right.
That's the truth of the matter. John, you want to really briefly tell us about you were telling me about the gravel part of the run and the last mile.
Yeah. So the Las Vegas Tri is down at Boulder Beach, and for those who aren't local, Boulder Beach is named because there's lots of boulders and lots of stones. And the way the run course goes out is it runs parallel to the lake on the Boulder Beach, and it's a bit of an access road. So there are cars that drive along there, but it is so unstable in terms of the surface. It's like running on sand, but still running on rocks. In fact, I still have bruises on my foot just because of all the rocks that you're stepping on. And I don't know why I wore my nice racing flats for this, and that was a mistake. I should have worn a bit of a beefier shoe for that. But it's about a mile on this rocky, sandy, loose dirt, which on one hand is sort of fun to do, but you got to really pay attention. Then you go uphill and you hit the road, turn around and for the sprint, and then come back down that hill. And really, for me, that was the part that I was mostly worried about is running downhill because you're running faster, your stride is longer, and your cadence is longer. And I'm just not doing that type of speed work with combined with a long stride.
Yep.
So yeah, that aggravated the hamstring and the calf. It got a little angry.
I can remember running that course once, and I don't know if it was before. Maybe it was before. I don't remember what race it was, but I only had 2 weeks after that course. It may have been the spring race, the Rage race, and I was racing in. But this is before, like the thicker soled shoes, and I was really in a racing flat.
Yep.
And I can remember like it affected my next race 2 weeks later because of the
Hmm.
bruise on the
Hmm.
bottom of my feet.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing, right? Because like, you think about we're running on pavement and concrete all of the
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
but it's something about like the way the rocks are, and a rock just catches you the wrong way.
Hmm.
And the other thing, obviously you've done a lot of study of ground reaction force. When you're racing
Yeah.
and you're pushing the speed, to like 620K, 630, or sorry, mile, 620 mile, 630 mile, the forces go up.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, that is pretty, that's a tough finish. I wish we could figure out a way for those two races to not have to run on the gravel.
Yeah. On one hand, it adds a little bit of, flavor to the race, but on the other hand, yeah, you got to wear the right shoes, and I certainly didn't wear the right ones, but it was still so much fun to be out there with everyone. It's a smaller group right now, but still really great to be out there and to be racing. And it was a beautiful day.
Yeah.
No wind, water was flat. The swim was long, which was good for me. So, I love that aspect of it. I was talking with the race organizers afterwards, and they were saying it was a little long. It wasn't for the swim. I like, yeah, but don't change it. Just keep it that way. So,
Yeah, because they're probably like expecting the people to come in at a certain time and like, oh, they're not
yeah,
back yet. What's going
yeah,
on here?
no, no, for
You know,
sure.
it's never short. The
No,
swim's
I
never
don't.
short.
Yeah.
You never hear people complaining though, right? It's very rarely like people, oh man, that swim was shorter. Oh dang, that run course was short. I'm really
I don't
disappointed
know.
in that.
Well,
Nobody ever says that.
Ironman Chattanooga,
Was it short?
even, oh, not short, but it was downstream, and even
Yeah.
Oregon 70.3.
No, that was not short. We did
No, but it was,
3,800 yards. I think that's what the Garmin's were coming out was 3,800 yards in like 23 minutes. That just means we're swimming fast. The
yeah,
distance was long.
just, yeah, that's like if it, for me, if it's a downhill with a tailwind on the bike, I'm up there, but,
Exactly.
oh,
So, John, I love the fact that you race the sprint races, and you've done a couple this year. And
mhm,
I really feel that like that's something that I'm missing, and
mhm, mhm.
I think that, and I don't know what it is, and we need to change the culture of triathlon to be that sprint racing is good. Again,
Yeah,
it's just as it's can be just as good as doing an Ironman, or just as good as doing a half Ironman. Sprint racing, in my opinion, is great.
well, I'll take a next step. I think for me, not having a year and a half of racing, my run has degraded quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it showed up at 70.3 St. George when we were up there for the World Championship. And I really believe it's because of the way I train, where my training runs are that long, slow distance run, and then I used my sprint races to do the speed work and that high intensity. And so once that came out of my regular schedule, I really think that's contributed to me having a harder time getting my run going. And I'm just getting older too.
I completely agree with you. And, you know, I think that I'll agree with you on that 100%. I think the other issue is, now I get why this happens, but there used to be a lot more 5K races that, in my opinion, were affordable,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? It's hard now to find a 5K race, at least in Las Vegas, for under $40.
No.
And I get the fact that they're trying to, work with charities and get money,
Hmm.
but we almost need a race series in Las Vegas that it's, $10 every Sunday, every Saturday. You can go out and race a 5K. And because I used to do that a lot. I used to race a lot
Yeah.
of 5Ks, and it really helped my run speed,
Yeah.
because there's nothing quite like putting a number on.
No, for sure. And to run with other people. Now, I'll put in a little plug for the Tri Club because our Tri Club, $65 a year for a single, 85 for family, and you get 4 free races.
Yeah.
And that is a great opportunity to do some sprint distance, get that high intensity, and just sort of practice some different things. You can try a crazy strategy that you would never try in a normal race. But I know we've talked about this before, but back in when I was racing back in the 80s and early 90s, uh, there was a weekly 5K
Yeah.
run, and I'd be able to go, and it was like that. It was either $5 or $10 to get in, and I could try a different pacing strategy each week. And I really learned a lot from doing that. I think I only did it for a year, but it was really so valuable to just be able to go and try, okay, this time I'm going to start off fast. I'm going to try to hold on. Okay, this time I'm going to start off really slow, which is really hard to do, and then try to negative split because you want to be drawn into everybody. And then this time I'm going to try even, and trying a different strategy each time was really good because then you get a sense of what's going to work for you and your physiology and your endurance level.
Yeah. So many places in the world have park run, and we've talked a little bit about
Mhm.
developing a park run in Las Vegas. Maybe when I retire, I'll have time
Yeah,
to do that. But there's so many places in the world every Saturday at a park. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same park, same course,
No.
and it doesn't cost anything, you know,
Mm-hmm.
for you to enter. I mean, I did one when I was in England. It was 3 years ago. Just showed up and there was 250 people racing a 5K.
That's great.
And I'm like, is this every week? And I'm like, yeah, every single week we get this many people out here.
That's amazing.
And the funny thing was, is there was another one like 20 miles down the road, and another one 20 miles down the road. Like every town
Mm.
had one. And
Mm-hmm.
man, that's pretty spectacular, really.
Oh, that is. I mean, just to have that buy-in from the community, because it's probably not the same. I mean, I'm sure they have a core group, but then I'm sure there's a lot of different people that come in on top of that that is different every week.
Yeah, for sure. So anyhow, let's let's change gears a little bit here, because we were going to talk about aerobic development, but I guess sprint racing is perfectly, goes into aerobic development.
Yeah.
And then obviously we still have some long racing to do this year. So John, if we have an athlete that comes to us or to you or to me and or in the tri club and says, you know what, I want to become more aerobically fit.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you? Like when they say aerobically fit?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting way to state it. I would say that's the ability to endure and the ability to do something for a long period of time. And so, the answer that people may get pulled into is they want to increase their VO2 max, and that's not what I would not go down that path. I would say the ability to sustain a pace for a long period of time.
Yeah, I would agree too. I think VO2 max gets too much credit,
Hmm.
that one metric. Because yes, having a high VO2 max is, I mean, ultimately the definition of aerobic, fit. It's like how much oxygen can you actually utilize
Hmm.
but it's for a short amount of time,
Yeah.
right? And really in triathlon, are we ever exercising at VO2 max level?
Mm-mm.
I mean, I don't think so. Even the finish of a sprint triathlon, you've been out there too long to actually
Yeah. Right.
hit your max level. So yeah, I love the fact you talk about the ability to endure. And John, we've talked about this many times about in other sports, an hour and a half race is long,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. That's right.
You consider an hour and a half race a sprint race. Oh,
Hmm.
that's a sprint race.
Yeah.
That's a sprint. Sprinting. That is not sprinting,
No.
right? Sprinting is
It is so poorly named.
60s, 100 meter, maybe to 200, and some
Yeah.
people might consider a 400 a sprint
Yeah.
on a track, right? In swimming, what do we got? You get the 25s, well,
Hmm.
for kids,
Well,
50s,
yeah.
100s, 200. They consider some
Not a sprint.
not a sprint,
200,
right?
no way. But a 200 would take a high level athlete 2 minutes.
Right,
Even
not a sprint,
yeah, no, if I do 2:30 now, I'd be really happy, but that is not a sprint.
right? So you think about that. We're taking that, like even the 100, which takes a really good swimmer a minute, right? And
Yeah,
they might consider that a sprint,
yeah,
and we're multiplying that by 90,
yeah, yeah,
right?
right, right.
For our sprint distance.
Mhm.
And so, some people I've talked to about this are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a sprint triathlon. I really need to work on my speed.
Mhm.
And I'm like, do you?
Yeah,
Is that what's going to get you that hour and a half? Because if I take the same athlete and they say, I'm going to sign up for a half marathon. Well, how long
right.
is it going to take you? Oh, about the same, about an hour and a half.
No,
So is there a lot of speed work in that? Well, no, I need to really work on my endurance for that.
right.
Because our heart and lungs, they don't recognize, oh, you're swimming now. Oh, you're biking now. You're running now. They're just
No,
metabolizing substrate, right?
right.
So I think this is a really interesting thing that we have in triathlon, and honestly, John, we have horrible names for our races,
We do, yeah.
right?
But so all right. So you got a lot in there
Yeah.
let's unpack a little bit of that.
Yes,
Um,
I tend to do that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it because let's start with VO2 max because as you mentioned, VO2 max is maximum rate that you can use oxygen to produce ATP. And ATP is just the substance that muscles use to shorten. With no ATP, the muscle seize up, and we call that rigor. If you die and you don't have any ATP, we call that rigor mortis. So that, everything just gets stiff because the muscle contracts and it can't relax actually. It can't complete the cycle. So ATP is the currency for muscles to generate force. And so VO2 max is just the maximum amount of oxygen you can use to generate ATP. And oxygen is part of this way that we take fuel, carbohydrates and fats to generate ATP. And it's rate limited by how fast your body can use oxygen. And the maximum rate that you can do that is that VO2 number. But like you said, we're never really exercising at VO2 max. And high VO2 max, 60 mLs per kg per minute, 70, maybe, some of the really elite athletes maybe get up to 80. I think I used this number before in a previous discussion we had where if you do 100 meters in just 10 seconds and you could only use aerobic metabolism, you would need a VO2 of about 140 mLs per kg per minute. You can't do it because that rate of using oxygen is just too high.
John, let me ask you. I was going to jump in. I'm going to ask you, as the physiologist in the room, how long can, let's just say, the average age group triathlete actually exercise at their VO2 max? What would you guess?
Well, all right. It depends on what you're doing to get to that VO2 max, because the problem is if you ramp up too quickly, you can, let me even go back a little bit further. If you do a graded exercise test where you slowly increment the levels of intensity, like maybe every 3 minutes you change the speed or the grade, and eventually you'll hit VO2 max. And we can note that speed, but that speed by itself is not, if you just go run that speed, that's not necessarily going to hit that VO2 max because you didn't do that graded part. And so if you just start off, boom, I'm going to run, 15 miles per hour, your VO2 will actually overshoot and then come back down. And so it won't actually hit that same number. That's why following a graded exercise test protocol to determine some of these physiological parameters, there's rules to it to be able to get that information. So that long way to get your answer. I don't know the answer to that question because it depends a little bit on how you get to that speed that elicits VO2.
Well, let's hypothetically say I'm out on my bike and I do a graded, so I start out and I go 100 watts, 150 watts, 200 watts, and I slow and I get up to the point where I actually am at my VO2 max. Like I'm literally bringing it in as fast as I can, as fast as I can. In general, you give me the 3.
Less than 3 minutes because that's our stage.
Yeah, but really, like you and I have both done many VO2 max tests, right? I got to be honest with you, for those of you that haven't done one, you cannot hold it very long.
No, and by definition, it's the highest VO2. Well, there's different ways to look at it. You can look for a plateau, which doesn't really happen in the majority of tests, but that VO2 max is usually a single number, which was recorded within a 20-second data point. And so, no, it doesn't. You're not lasting long. But there's also all that work leading up to that. That's why it's a little tricky. It's a very deceptively hard question. So
no, it is absolutely, like, I actually threw it to you because I know it's a really hard question and probably one without an answer. But those are the most, I think, the best ones to postulate on.
Yeah.
And to allow people to kind of to understand. And so then, I mean, we're kind of going down the road to well, this is still aerobic, right? So we're talking about maximum aerobic. And so I see many training plans and listen to coaches talk about VO2 max development and exercising at VO2 max or above it to develop this system. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, like I've done probably 30 VO2 max tests in my life. Oh, I don't know if I could actually train above my VO2 max for
well, okay.
As far as the measurable apart, right? Could I do more wattage than my VO2 max number? Yes. Could I run faster than that? Yes. But it seems very nebulous to me.
So this is really good because we're getting into a lot of physiology really quickly. Because when you do that graded exercise test and you get to that maximum, or you get to the point where you say, okay, I can't do any more, you're exhausted. And we go back and look at your VO2 data, we can say, okay, this is the highest number. Well, to get to that high number, it's not all aerobic pathway that
Right.
you're taking fuel to get to that ATP. At some point during that test, you're going to have more contribution of another pathway which doesn't need oxygen. So a lot of times we refer to this as anaerobic, but the, this is a subtle point, but oxygen's always present in our body. And so we're never anaerobic. Right? We never have an absence of oxygen in our body. But so another way to coin this is to say it's an oxygen independent pathway to produce ATP. That meaning that you don't need oxygen to get ATP. So as you do that graded exercise test, you get to a point where that oxygen independent pathway really contributes more and more and more. So when you're at that VO2 max, not only are you processing oxygen as quickly as you can, but you're also hitting that speed based upon the oxygen independent or anaerobic pathway to produce ATP. So this going to your point in terms of how long you can do it. Well, now you're getting lots of contribution of this anaerobic oxygen independent pathway and your VO2. That's hard to sustain.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard to sustain.
And I think the other thing that's important is some people have a high VO2 max and they just have a high VO2 max. It doesn't mean they're good endurance athletes. And some people have a low VO2 max, but they can sustain close to that intensity of a VO2 max for a longer period of time. So when you even look at classic, real high level marathon runners, you can get a range of 20 mLs per kg per minute of maximum VO2 max. They're all over the board. There's no predictive value of that.
I think it's super interesting to talk about that, John. So let's hypothetically say I had a VO2 max of 60.
Okay.
Right? And you had a VO2 max of 50.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, and I'm agreeing with you 100%, that is not a predictor of how we'll do on a triathlon
No.
or how we'll do in a bike race, or because that doesn't give us enough data, right?
No.
What gives us the data is what is the percentage of VO2 max that I can sustain for the length of that race? Is that,
Good.
would you
Oh
agree?
yeah, no, totally. But that's a big part of it, but it also is how well you do is a function of how well your muscles operate
Right.
and how well they coordinate. Because think of someone who has lots of, I'll say co-contraction, lots of uncoordinated muscles that they start working against each other. You
You're
can
talking about a swimmer trying to run. Got it. Got it. Okay. So that's what you're describing for.
That's right. Well, you can raise that VO2 up. You can have a high VO2, but that doesn't mean that you're having a fast run performance. So there is a skill involved here, not only just being able to contract muscle and use oxygen, but you've also got to be able to coordinate things in a way to move yourself forward.
No, and why I brought up the swimmer that tries to run
Yeah,
is we can have a very elite swimmer with a VO2
yeah,
max of 70.
yeah,
And you go and say, okay, why don't you sign up for a half marathon? You get this unbelievable VO2 max, and they might be able to sustain a little bit,
yeah.
but they'll get to a point where neurologically they're just they're not efficient enough.
Right.
Right. So they'll actually be running at a very low percentage of their
Mm-hmm.
VO2 max.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So you look at that plus, or you actually might even be relatively high because of their inefficiency. They're not very coordinated, as it were.
No, totally, totally. Well, and the other trick, especially with running, is that running is really, really, you can benefit from elastic tissues or tissues that are elastic. And elastic tissue doesn't cost energy. So if you can stretch, connective tissue and let it recoil, that recoil, if you can coordinate things correctly, can actually help you move forward. But that elastic behavior is really not metabolically costly. What ends up happening is the muscles are ending up firing in a way to make that whole muscle tendon unit a certain elastic characteristic. and then you're able to benefit from that stretch of the muscle tendon. But yeah, as we get older, we lose that.
No, I love the fact you're bringing that up, though. Like, we weren't planning on going down this road at all, but I've been reading some stuff about really elite marathoners, and Kipchoge obviously comes to mind, and some of his stuff. He doesn't stretch.
Right.
He can't even touch his toes.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, and one of the theories with him and other elite marathoners is if they stretch, they'll potentially stretch out that elastic component.
Yep.
Right. And they want to be tight because they want those rubber bands that you're talking about, the elastic component, to actually be very, very springy. And so, interesting to look at. And then when you look at, ways to regain that elasticness, plyometric type activities, so bouncing type activities, rather than stretching or rather than even slow, heavy weights. Because I think the elastic component, like you're mentioning, is imperative in running. Now, not imperative in cycling.
No, that's right. Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different task, non-weight bearing. And so, running is it. So, all right. So let me add to the stretch part, because running mechanically, sometimes we just model running as a bouncing ball.
Yep.
Right. It's a perfect, scenario. We call it a mass spring model, where the spring represents, in essence, a bit of the contraction and the elastic behavior of muscle, tendon, lower extremity. It's sort of this model that we use to predict that running pattern, which is really interesting. But what's really cool, a number of years ago, probably about 15, maybe longer years ago, I had someone in PT approach me and said, "Hey, I think that this stretching negatively influences performance." In this case, he was interested in jump performance. He said, "I think if we do a static stretch, people may, before a jump, that they would jump lower than if they use a dynamic strap or stretch or some type of warm up." I'm like, that's not going to matter.
That was our colleague Michelle Samuel. I mean, that was her thesis, and it was published. It was in the LA Times.
Yeah.
And but that was the acute effect.
That's right. And what was surprising is that when you did a static stretch before a jump, you were a centimeter lower in your jump height.
Yeah.
And it's like that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's a big influence, and it's exactly what you described. Because if you're stretching, maybe not only the elastic issue, but the muscle itself, if you lengthen the muscle too long, it's actually hard for that muscle to generate force. Yeah. And so I always do this with, I always demonstrate this in class. Like, if you squeeze your fingers like this, you can squeeze really hard. And I always have everyone do it. And they're always like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Just squeeze your fingers. You can squeeze your fingers really hard. Then go through, let me do it this, where am I? Okay. Then go through wrist extension and then try to squeeze again." And you can't, you physically can feel it. You cannot squeeze as hard. And I go, why is that? It's the same muscles. But now what we've done is we've lengthened the muscles that are causing finger flexion, and that's harder. So muscles that cross two joints are really susceptible to this length tension, like the hamstring. And so we're asking that, in the case of the hamstring, to do hip extension, which shortens the hamstring, and knee flexion, which also shortens the hamstring. And so you put that muscle in a really weak position during running. Anyways, that's a little bit too far on the side.
No, I think it's perfect. Honestly, in the story that I tell my students is, you got yourself a slinky or a spring, right? If I take over time and I stretch it and I stretch it and I stretch it, eventually it doesn't have the same recoil, right? And so to take this a step further, I find that like gymnasts are the most amazing athletes because somehow they've maintained power and elasticity and length. But if you get into, deep into gymnastic lore and the way they train, they're doing so much of the springing type stuff. So they're elongating, but at the same time, they're elongating. They're not elongating by sitting there stretching a lot. It's a misnomer, right? They're actually going through motion with a springing type activity,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, I think I find gymnasts fascinating because of
Yeah.
this. It seems always in athletics there's a give and take.
Hmm.
I increase one thing, I'm gonna decrease the other. But somehow gymnasts have figured this out, and it's pretty spectacular, really.
Well, it's sort of like where you're going before, where you're talking about having the ability to do a sprint triathlon and an Ironman triathlon. I think that's really neat to have those in your repertoire or those in your schedule for the year,
Yeah.
because I think that I hear that too is like, well, I'm training for something long, so I'm not going to do the sprint stuff. I'm like, well, no, the sprint stuff will actually help you
Yes.
in preparing for an Ironman.
But John, I would contend that a sprint triathlon and an Ironman are not that different.
Hmm.
I would say 100-meter dash to a mile
Hmm.
is is a greater difference in the physiology.
Right.
So we're talking about a 15-second race for like an age grouper to
Hmm.
a 5-minute race.
Hmm.
So there's, what did we got there? Like about a 5-minute difference. There's a huge difference in the training that goes on
Hmm.
compared to sprint race to Ironman. The energy systems aren't that different.
I agree with you, but here's where I would lean towards the mechanics.
I
And
agree.
I know when I race an Ironman, my heart rate needs to be like here. Then a half is about here, and then a sprint I can be up in this region. So I can map that out really nicely. So there is some physiology, but for me, mostly for a sprint, it's the biomechanics of my run, especially.
Yeah.
And if I just focus on the run at this point, the biomechanics of the run is that much different that if I don't do some training or some prep work to say, hey, John, this is what it's going to be like to run at this speed, then I get into the sprint race and it's a little bit
Yeah,
risky in terms of.
it's risky, but John, here's the difference though. If you don't do that, and I know you're
Hmm.
going to run a 22.
Hmm. Yeah.
If you do that, you're going to run a 21.
Yeah. Right. Right.
We're talking about 1 minute, a 1 minute difference, and percentage wise, it's not that great of a difference,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Yeah, you will be happier running a 21,
That's right.
but you see what I'm saying? It's not really that much of a difference. But I'll
Right.
take it exactly where I think you were going to go with this. But then you go to the Ironman side, and yes, you're running slower,
Hmm.
and yes, you need to do specific things to build up resilience.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I would contend if you really, really wanted to do a great job with your sprint racing, building up the same kind of resilience would definitely help you.
Oh, I agree with that. I really do. And I think yeah, especially for a lot of us, especially where I'm at with Ironman right now. I mean, I'm trying to do a decent marathon. I'm not trying to do it fast at all. I'm just trying to have a good, consistent marathon to go along with a nice swim bike. But it's costing too much for me to put in a lot of time on the run right now.
Yeah, and really, it's like, what is the answer there, right? Is it because it's not an aerobic thing for you,
Hmm.
right? It truly is,
Right.
and it's for me too. It's a resilience,
Hmm.
and what can we do to build up
Yep.
resilience?
The
And
durability and
yeah,
resilience. Yeah.
because the truth of the matter is, I would be way happier if an Ironman was a 1 hour swim and then a 10-hour bike. Okay, I'm good. Because I can ride my bike for 10 hours.
That's right. That's
And,
right.
and and I would have very little drop off between hour 5 and hour 10, to be
Yep.
honest with you.
Yep.
But when you add that 4 hour run
Hmm. Yep.
after, it really is it's building resiliency, I think, even more than building aerobic fitness.
Hmm. And I think we need to put this in context. We're not talking about elite athletes like
No,
Ferdino, Lionel, totally different.
I'm talking about age groupers between
Laura
10
Siddell,
hours,
I'll mention Laura or Danielle Reeve or Lucy. Those athletes,
different story.
different story. What we're talking about is really, well, the mere mortal.
I'm thinking between a 10-hour and a 14-hour
Hmm.
Ironman, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And I think oftentimes uh, people that I know spend a lot of time listening to what pros are doing for their
Mhm.
training.
Yep.
And it's not the same sport.
It's a different world.
It's a different world. And I was listening to a podcast earlier and they were like, the average triathlete swims 30,000 yards a week. I'm like, I consider myself above average. I do. I really do. I don't mean to be cocky, but I consider myself above average triathlete.
Yeah.
9,000 a week is about where I'm at.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, where are they getting this statistic from? I'm like, okay, yes, the average pro triathlete swims 30,000.
Right.
Right. And then they were like, okay. And then they bike about, they said, I think it was 300 miles a week. And I'm like, man, I think once again, I'm a little bit above average.
Yeah.
And 220 is like, that's getting to the peak for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think we do need to put it into perspective. Even high end age groupers aren't getting those numbers. And because of that, they haven't built up the resilience.
Well, and the time for an age grouper to get to some of those numbers is far too much. I don't go, I'm typically around 10, 12,000 yards a week swimming, pretty consistently. And then as I start approaching an Ironman, I'll start bumping it up. I may get to 20. If I'm doing like a 10K open water swim, okay, I want to be over 20,000 a week. I know that. But for an Ironman, half Ironman, that time that you're spending in that segment is too much to get over that. Same thing with biking. I mean, I'll be like you, over 200 is that's a solid week. I haven't been over 300 miles in a week for a long time. And so, but
I think I've only ever done it once or twice in my life.
It's going to take too much time to get to that. And that time isn't going to be better spent recovering or being healthy at that point. So
the other one, we talk about this is even back to the run, so many, once again, triathletes that I talk to, like, oh, you're doing an Ironman. Okay. You got to have that 22-mile run under your belt. I disagree. I think as an age grouper, I completely disagree. I would say that you need more frequency of running. Do you better than the long 22-mile run, because, and I'll take this back to what we talked about in the last couple of weeks with recovery. How long do you think it takes a aging triathlete to recover from a 22-mile training?
Right. That's right.
Right. Yeah. A pro, once again, youngish pro that's built up a lot of resiliency over the years. Okay. But I'm telling you right now, like, when I get to 20-mile run, I'm destroyed.
Yeah. Right.
I can't train the next day, or not. I can't train effectively the next day. And it may be 2 or 3 days down the road before I can actually have a nice run again. So I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because Ironmans than I have.
We've talked about the challenge of doing training studies, and it's really hard to do a good training study. But the training studies that are coming around is that frequency of training is probably better than lumping the duration of your session. So we have frequency, intensity, time, and mode is what we look at in terms of training specificity. And if you're going to put a lot in one of those bins, put a lot in frequency. And I know you're a big advocate of this, is doing, instead of one long run, do 2 runs a day. Do something in the morning, then do something in the evening. But then you allow some recovery in between then. And so your second run is still going to be adding to that durability, but you're not running into that risk of real injury risk by doing that one long session.
I'm even a big advocate of the run walk for training. So I'm going to have a pretty big run tomorrow, but I'm going to do a run walk. My plan is to run an hour, and then the second hour is a run walk. Yeah. Right. So I don't actually get into a position where my form starts to go, and that will increase my risk of injury. And it's okay, because when I'm walking let's say I do every mile, and this is what I'll end up doing. I'll do a mile, and then I'll probably do a 1-minute walk. It's not like I'm destroying my run by doing this. Right. Like, I'm still gaining a tremendous amount, but after that 1 minute, I'm going to feel a little bit more fresh. my next mile of running is going to be better. And,
Mm-hmm.
I always go back to, to think about this with swimming. We stop all the time.
Yeah, right.
Last night in the pool, we were doing 200s. And I don't even know how many we did, but after 30 seconds rest, my next 50 is always better than
Yeah.
if I wouldn't have even 30 seconds.
You guys swim with me more. I don't do those.
And actually, honestly, like there, we should actually we should have a podcast on the downside of master swimming. I would love to have a conversation on that.
Well,
I don't think it's always in the best interest of a triathlete.
I love our master swimming on this side of town. I actually was swimming with them really for most of this season, and it is fun to get in with each other, and you can get pushed a little bit here and there in terms of intensity. So yeah, I think you and I may end up on different sides of that, but I still enjoy
No,
when
I just think that master swimming has too much intensity.
Oh, okay. Well, where I was going to go is that I enjoy doing a long swim,
No,
like
no,
1500. Yeah.
and I do too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at no point will I go to master swimming and the set be 2 1500s,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because everyone would quit. These are all a lot of them are swimmers, right? And they are used to doing, hey, we're going to do 10 100s and then we're going to do 5 200s on this interval with this, and for me, like, this is too much intensity. So even for me, like last night with the 200s, I purposely dialed the intensity down and made it an aerobic session.
Well, okay. So this though goes back to the importance of having coordination and having that skill. And I think the rest that you're talking about, a lot of times you can use that so that you do swim that next 50 better because
Yeah.
now you're learning that technique. And then now that rather than the next 50, now it's the next 100, next 200 and so forth. And as you're finding that technique, but I want to go back to your walk run because I think there's really some good research on the walk run, and there does seem to be a benefit for it. Unless you're trying to run a 240 marathon. All right, that's again context. We're not trying to get to a 240, but if you're trying to get under 4 hours, 3.5 hours, maybe under 5 hours, wherever that is, having a walk run strategy can really benefit that endurance. But the key is you got to start it right away. You can't wait until you've already hit that fatigue and then try to say, okay, now I'm going to do a walk run. No, it's already too late. You got to start it right from the beginning.
Well, I don't know, John. I think it depends on the athlete, right? So my strategy is going to be probably like an hour
Mm-hmm.
and then start a walk run.
Mm-hmm.
But that's coming off of, a 70.3 where I ran the entire thing and I felt good.
Right.
Right. So I know, but I know like at about an hour point, that's where I start to feel a little bit of,
Mm-hmm.
for me, start to feel
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of fatigue. And even, going through to my Ironman, like this is going to be my strategy is to run the first hour
Mm-hmm.
and then start the run walk.
Okay.
And I'm right now I'm looking at like a 9-1.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's me. Like,
Right.
but I also, I'd like to, I've kind of modeled it a 3:30.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is where I figure I can be even with this strategy. But yeah, I do think that if you're going to, especially if you're going to that 4 hour plus, starting it right away.
Right. Well, and a couple of strategies on that also, if you really get in trouble, not you, but me, others, would, when you're in that real challenging part of the marathon segment of the Ironman is walk 100 steps, run 100 steps.
Yep.
And that does a couple things. One is it gives you that walk run strategy that you speak of, but then it also distracts you because now you're counting and you're not necessarily thinking of the physiology, the dark spot that you're in. And it may actually help get you out of that dark spot because you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're counting all the way to 100. And now you say, okay, now I got to walk, now I got to run and alternate.
Yeah. No, I love the fact that you're trying to, you're trying to get your mind off of it
Mm-hmm.
and get the focus away from my feet hurt, my legs hurt, I'm tired. I want to just lay down in a ball and cry.
Right.
No, I love that. And, that's definitely a good piece of sports psychology.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that goes back. We've talked a little bit about one of our colleagues worked, Dr. Gabby Wolf, on what you focus on can influence your movement, and so sometimes just focusing away from the body externally is actually a good thing. But okay, so let's go back and talk about training, and I guess now we're sort of talking training for an Ironman or even a half. I'm also an advocate of going and doing hikes instead of even runs, especially up at Mount Charleston, where you're going hiking up and down, because that down part of the hike will actually help with that durability, because it is that eccentric contraction that we're loading muscles and we're stretching muscles as we're trying to contract them.
yeah, I love it. And one of the things that I'm an advocate for is actually hiking up and then trying to jog down,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be fast.
Yeah.
Like, it can be just maybe a little bit faster than actually walking down, but I like that springing, right?
Yeah.
And getting that eccentric load a little bit higher. Um, you know, it's not easy to do, and you will be
Mm.
sore, but it definitely, I think, can help you. And thinking back to a few weeks ago when we did that crazy race, I wish I would have done more of that
Yeah, right.
leading into that.
Mhm.
So next year, if that course ends up being the exact same, I will absolutely be
Yep.
doing that, hiking up
Yep.
and the springing jog down steep hills.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully my quadriceps don't get so destroyed next year.
Well, that and sort of like what I talked about at the Las Vegas Tri is doing that long stride
Yep.
and still having a high cadence. That combination we're not usually getting, even if we're going and doing some sprint running. Going downhill, you're going to lengthen your stride, and you can still have a high cadence. So you've got to teach the body how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. You look at, the training plans online and whatever the case may be, and a lot of them put hills and hill
Mm-hmm.
and hill sessions. But it's interesting. Almost all of them that I've come across are like, okay, well, you want to sprint up the hill for like 2 minutes and a nice easy jog down.
Right.
I contend that often we should do the opposite, is
Yeah.
go easy on the way up and then sprint on the way down, because number one, you're going to be building that side, the eccentric side. But number two, if you're trying to keep a relatively stable heart rate
Mm-hmm.
for aerobic training,
Yep.
you actually have to go fast on the way down,
Yep.
right? But I rarely have seen a pre-fabbed training program that actually did downhill running as part of it. And I know why, because there is increased risk of injury.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, there is research on overspeed training,
Yep.
and running downhill at an incline is one of those. It depends on how steep. You're talking something really steep. It
No,
can
no,
be,
I'm talking even going like 2 or 3 degrees
that's
down.
right. That's right. It doesn't need to be that much, but you can do an overspeed training by running downhill. And there is some good research on that. And also, um, people have messed around with elastic cords, even on the runners as well as on the swimmers. I mean, swimming has lots of toys that you can use. But for running, there is also the overspeed training, trying to get someone to learn that motor coordination of the lower extremity and the upper body, trying to make sure you've learned how to run fast.
So in my previous life, when I was a speed and agility coach slash athletic trainer,
Oh, that's right. That you were
um,
doing that a lot
I had a ton. I had
because
these,
you were doing soccer and
yeah, soccer athletes. I had these bungee cords, John, that were the longest ones stretched out to about 40 yards.
wow.
And so then they would load it, and then I
Hmm.
have to start running, but then I had the person holding the bungee cord also run.
That's right. Right.
Right.
Right.
So now the person behind is maybe going 50 or 60 yards of over speed running.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speed development that we created through that is fabulous.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fabulous, because the question always comes down to, like, how can you ever run faster than your fastest run?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
how do you ever become faster? Well, the only way to become faster is to run faster.
Yeah.
And it's some fabulous research. And obviously you're probably you're really familiar with the research on this that was done early in the Olympic Training Center, when they put in those first treadmills that could go 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, right.
Drop the people on the treadmill and they would just like rabbits, right? Like or hamsters on a hamster wheel.
Mhm.
And it works.
Yeah.
It absolutely works. Now, that being said, that's a little bit out of the context for what we're talking about. But even still, if you're wanting to increase your 5K time, and and your limit is just foot speed and turnover,
Yeah.
maybe downhill running at that 1 or 2 degrees might be the key.
Yeah. Or we are going to have a special treadmill going out at our Lake Las Vegas satellite lab. And that's a body weight support treadmill where it lifts you up while you're on the treadmill. And that's a great way to do over pace training,
Yeah.
is take a little bit of the weight edge off you, but set the machine to lift you up even 10% of your body weight. And now you can run faster at the same physiological cost as what you would normally be running. And so I've done that a few times. I think you have as well, just trying to mess around with the different types of speeds you can achieve on that. And I think that's going to be a neat weapon that people will be able to take advantage of out here.
Well, especially now that this is coming into the be something that the average user can buy, right, with the lever
Yeah.
system. So you and I both talked to the guy from Lever in the last couple of weeks, and actually I reached out to him. He would like to be on the podcast, so we'll bring him on.
Awesome.
One of these days to talk about that as well. But and I know it's not maybe within reach of everybody because they're about $1,000.
No.
But yeah, like if you have a treadmill at home, you could do unweighting and do this kind of thing at home as well.
No. Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in it for taking people that are having trouble staying in below that LT1 or below their aerobic threshold.
Yeah, that's right.
And they get so frustrated because, I have to walk to get this. Well, you could take 10% off of them and they can still run, but maintain their aerobic zone or zone 1, zone 2. I think that's another area that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about the lever system that connects to a treadmill, your home treadmill, and that lifts you up while you run too, through a series of bungee cords or elastic cords and levers. Whereas the treadmill that we're putting out, and you're right, that's about $1,000. And then the treadmill we're putting out at Lake Las Vegas, we actually have 2 of them down in our lab down at UNLV. They cost $36,000, so a little different.
Yeah, so the average person they're not going to have one in their house,
but
or have access to one.
We're hoping to be able to make the one out at Lake Las Vegas accessible to people to come in and try. And I tell you what, it's great if you do have a running injury, because it's a nice way to simulate running, but you can run without pain. And sometimes just mentally you feel better because now you feel like you're running again, even though the impact and the demand of it is far less.
Absolutely. Well, John, we've went almost an hour, and we really haven't even touched our aerobic training.
Well, we've danced around it, but okay. So Max actually writes on our Facebook page on the live stream. We were talking about running and the importance of coordination. He says lends the importance to doing drills and strides, etc. And I think that really does. And I don't think enough of us do running drills. We do a lot of them in swimming. We probably don't do any in cycling, and we may do a little bit in running, and we probably really need to do.
I'm going to push back on Max on this.
Are you?
Yeah, because once again, we look at the elite marathoners, Kipchoge in particular, no drills.
Yeah, I don't know Kipchoge's training style, but I love his running style. I always like to think I'm running like him.
From drills. Came from running a lot, running young. But yes, so I'm just being a little bit of a troublemaker with Max there, because I do think for someone that doesn't have the background of Kipchoge, that running drills are actually
okay. But I think, to your point, I think you need to run in a variety of situations, and your brain needs to figure out the best running pattern. Yes. We don't always know what that is for any particular person. And if you and I go to Kipchoge and say, well, why don't you do this a little bit differently? That's probably not the way to go. But I do think if you have someone do lots of drills, run forward, run backwards, run sideways, run on grass, run on track, run on dirt, then the body and the brain starts to figure out the best coordination pattern. So it's really sort of odd. And
You
we
know,
call it optimization in
and,
our research.
but I also think that, how many nightmares have you heard about, John, in the last 20 years with people changing running, right?
That that
And
sometimes is the biggest risk is we think we know what the right running style is, and we say, well, why don't you strike the ground this way, or why don't you do this? Why don't
yeah,
you lengthen? Why don't you shorten your stride? And that's not that sometimes can introduce a risk because what we end up doing is we tell the person to change something too fast.
yeah.
And the person, that change is going to introduce a new stress that the body's not ready to handle. And that can lead to an injury. And so really, especially with weight bearing activities like running, that's the one of the three sports, that's the one that has the greatest injury risk because it's weight bearing. Subtle changes can have a big impact. And so we've been
Something about
looking
just
at,
putting them in a different pair of running shoes.
that's right, totally.
Like, not even saying, hey, we want you to be a 4-foot striker or a mid-foot striker. I need you to just do this. I need you to do this. Literally just changing their shoes from an 8 millimeter drop to a 4 millimeter drop. Boom, they can get injured.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Oh, and that drop of that shoe, you're right. It just a subtle change, but it can make a big difference, which is why you want to change your shoes out before they run out, because otherwise you wear that shoe down. And even if you get the same model shoe,
Yeah.
you're actually going to have a different shoe than what you think you have, and all of a sudden you're introducing a new stress. So, oh man, it is.
We could have another podcast on just on this one.
We're gonna have to. Okay, so Max also adds, yeah, John is the king of straight sets. Yeah, 3K straight killed me. Yeah, I do like the longest I'll go straight. Well, actually, the longest I've gone is 10,000, but the longest I'll go in prepping for a race is usually around 5K. Okay, and so this actually I was going to talk about this, but Max has it here. I think the variety of speeds that Kipchoge can run, his marathon pace being 4:34, slower runs being many minutes slower. So maybe the context of drills for him is the pace variance. That's exactly the point. Thank you, Max. That was exactly the point I wanted to make, and you picked up on that. So yeah, I've seen training videos of Kipchoge. He's not running very fast, but that change in running speed is introducing a different way to run than his marathon pace or something faster than that. So no, excellent.
And you're absolutely right. And Max is right on this as well, is that many of us don't have different gears, right?
Yep.
The elite runners have 15 different gears.
Yep.
I mean, the average age group triathlete maybe has 2, 3, right? They got a 5K speed, they got maybe their half marathon speed, and they got a marathon speed. And there's not much variety. And same with swimming. Like, John, you're a very good swimmer. You probably have more gears than I do. I got an easy gear and I got a fast gear. That's all I have swimming.
Right.
Like, I've got 2 gears.
Yep.
And once again, an elite swimmer will have 10, 15 different gears.
Yep. No, and I think that's in running too. And again, Max is doing great here. He's given us some good stuff to go on here. He says most age groupers have a 2-minute pace variance on running. And I think that's right. I think people are not experiencing those slow speeds and the fast speeds. And I think if you do that, if you introduce that type of, we call it variability, I think you will become a better running because you're learning running. It's not necessarily just a physiological issue, but you are training your brain to figure out different running style because you run differently if you run 12-minute miles versus 6-minute miles.
And Max,
your pattern would be different.
Obviously, Max is a coach and he deals with this on a regular basis.
He also had a good training in a graduate program, so.
but he deals with, I'm sure, on a regular basis of athletes wanting to run this one pace.
Yep.
Like, that just sub-threshold pace, right? Not threshold, just below it. So they feel like they're working hard and that's their pace, right? And you tell them to run slower and they're like, oh, I can run faster than this.
Yeah.
Tell them to run faster. Oh, that's too hard.
Yeah.
Right. And so they keep gravitating towards this moderate hard pace. And you're right, then they're not building the variability.
So let's close this episode by the way we started, in that this is why I think both of us think do sprints and Ironmans in the same season.
Absolutely. My thing is did I do every distance race that year?
Yeah.
Except for Ironman, because like I think after the next couple Ironman, I'm thinking I'm done with Ironman.
Yeah.
Because I actually personally don't think it's a good thing for me in my life and my life balance.
Yeah.
But I want to do a sprint, an Olympic and a half. And now the new thing is the 100K race, right? That's what the
Ooh.
PTO is pushing. The 100K, that's
Yeah.
that's going to be their distance.
Uh,
And maybe do that the 100K, which is obviously halfway between, a little bit more than Olympic, a little less than a half.
yeah.
But I think having that variability is
Yep.
awesome. And then same thing, like I want to race in 5Ks and I want to race in half marathons and I want to do everything kind of in between. I think that's in our best interest.
Well, we're seeing the pros gravitate towards that, where they're being competitive at the iron distance, they're being competitive at 17.3, and someone like Lucy Charles then even jumps down and does, some ITU type of stuff. So it's really pretty
She
interesting.
even raced the Super League.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
A week after her and Gustav Eden did it a week after.
Oh,
Now she got timed out though. It was an eliminator and she didn't make the last round. But I'm like, still pretty impressive.
Towing the start line and giving it a shot like that, that's fantastic.
Yeah, agreed.
Hey, this has been a fun talk.
It really has. Hey, Max, thank you so much for chiming in. That's great.
Yeah, that is wonderful. All right. Thanks, Ted. Hey, have a good weekend out there.
Hey, you too.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.